Hey girls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's vlog is a very special one because we are going to have my dogs choose my TBR. That's right, we're gonna figure out if my dogs, Bruce and Obi, have good taste or bad taste, or you know, maybe my taste, because taste is subjective. So we're gonna have a little experiment. Bruce is gonna pick 2 books, Obi is gonna pick 2 books. We're gonna, you know, do a little treat on the book encouragement for them to cooperate there, but they're gonna pick some books for me to read. I'm gonna read 2 of Bruce's, 2 of Obi's, and then we'll compare at the end of this vlog to see, you know, who knows me better, who picked out the better books for me to read. When I was picking out books for this challenge, I had a lot of new release horror books from the library, so that's how I picked the selections for the dogs. So each time they'll get 3 selections of new horror releases and they'll go ahead and pick one for me every single time. So there you have it. That's the kind of introduction because I know this video is going to be pretty long. Before we get started, let me know in the comments down below, who do you think has the better reading taste, Bruce or Obi? And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into the vlog and Bruce's first pick. First pick of the vlog, Bruce went ahead and picked out Island Witch. This is a 2024 release that is a gothic horror. I saw when I was doing my most anticipated video, I think this came out in February. I remember this one had comp titles to like The Exorcist, and I'm very intrigued to pick this one up. This one is set in 19th century Sri Lanka and inspired by local folklore. It follows the daughter of a traditional demon priest, relentlessly bullied by peers and accused of witchcraft herself, as she tries to solve the mysterious attacks that have been terrorizing her coastal village. So I have heard this is just such an engrossing gothic horror story. It's paranormal. We have on the back cover Isabel Cañas saying that it's razor sharp anti-colonial historical horror. We also have Ashley Winstead saying it's raw, brutal, and beautiful. So I think Bruce picked a pretty good one for the first book in this vlog series. Today is Saturday. It's a lazy Saturday. I'm hoping to spend a lot of time reading this book, and I'll check in maybe around the 50% mark and I'll let you know how Bruce's reading taste is.
But why has that happened, Archie?
Hey friends, bit of an informal book update, but I am 50% of the way through Island Witch by Jayatissa, and I am really enjoying it. Bruce has picked a good book to start this vlog out with. So number one, it's a little bit of an informal update just because we have been having some very severe storms. There's our tornado watch, tornado warning, all of that all that jazz, which is, you know, this area in the spring, unfortunately. So we've just been under some severe weather watches, and I get very anxious, and it's just been storming, and I normally don't sleep that well during thunderstorms anyway. All that to say, it is very late, so I am filming this by the light of my computer screen and then just my LED lights in my room. But I had to give an update because I am at the 50% mark of this one and I'm really enjoying it. It is getting a little bit creepy, which is always fun to read. It's about 140. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's 140 right now. I'm reading this historical horror. There's demons, there's curses, there's mysteries. Our main character, Amara, she is the daughter of the village Kapua, who is kind of a priest. The dust jacket says demon priest. There's obviously a lot of nuance in that, and we are following Amara and her family. They are Sri Lankan, and there was a really interesting note in the, I guess I wanted to say acknowledgements, but it was in the beginning, so I think it was an author's note just about the fact that these people and this land have been colonized so many times and have had so many influences by other cultures. And this book does have to deal very heavily with the town where Amara is growing up. It is becoming increasingly more and more colonized, and with that colonization becomes religion. And so her father, who is a Kapua, ooh, sorry, there's a huge thing of lightning. I don't know if you just saw, but her father used to be a very respected man in the community. It was a respected position. It was a religion and a set of beliefs that used to be pretty much everyone in this area believed. However, with Christianity and colonization, more and more people are starting to believe that her father, Amara's father, is consorting with like the Christian devils and demonic presences, and they are slowly starting to become outcasts in a small knit town and village and community that they used to be very much a part of. So it is historical horror. We're following those conversations of colonization, and I definitely think this is one. It does kind of give Exorcist vibes, but our story really takes off when this village, a lot of men in the community are being attacked by what Amara and her family believes are the Yaka, and what the Christian church and a lot of people in their community are believing is Amara and her father, primarily her father, but her whole entire family are like they think that Amara and her family are setting demons upon these men. So throughout this book, we're seeing Amara like really wanting to take it upon herself to clear her father's name, to clear her family's name. However, you do see throughout this book, it is very hard because she is a young woman and she's dealing with not only these specific trials and tribulations, but also just the trials and tribulations of becoming marriageable age and trying to figure out her future. Her father used to take her along with all of like the spiritual practices and teach her all of the spiritual teachings, but as she's grown up and she's of marriageable age and she's a young woman, her mother and father don't let her participate in that anymore. So she's kind of dealing with her identity being changed around and kind of grasping on and holding on to her identity in a constantly shifting culture that is constantly being invaded by and being taken up by colonialism, and how British colonialism culture is really seeping into Sri Lankan culture at this point in time. So I'm really enjoying it. It's definitely a slow burn. I'd say this is more of like I think a lot of historical horror that I've read, at least recently, I don't want to make any big sweeping statements because it's late, and I'm sure once I finish filming this, I'm going to think of like ones that are exceptions to the rule, but like historical horror, usually a little bit slower paced, which I'm enjoying. I like a good character driven horror, but I'm going to get back to reading this. Hopefully the weather clears up soon and I get tired and I'm able to go to bed, but 50% of the way in, Bruce has made a really good pick so far, so I will update when I am finished with this book. Hey friends, happy Saturday. I finally finished Island Witch by Jayatissa, and Bruce definitely picked a really good book for the start of this vlog. When this book was being promoted and before it was being released, a book that I was seeing a lot for this book, a comp title, was The Exorcist. And while I think in terms of what is inside the book, like maybe things that happen in the plot, there is like that exorcism, that loss of innocence, that kind of plot going on. The takeaways after you read The Exorcist and after you read this one are going to be very vastly different. So while they do deal in, again though, different like belief systems as well, because you know, one is very much a Christian exorcism and this one's dealing into more Sri Lankan folklore and mythos, and the two of them, they both kind of deal with the same ideas of possession and demonic or otherworldly forces, but like their execution and the takeaways are quite different. So don't go into this expecting The Exorcist, because you're not going to get that. What you are going to get is a very intense book. This book is adult fiction, however, I feel like it fits in that interesting space. I guess you'd probably call it new adult fiction, but it's adult fiction where I would say it kind of slots into the same kind of category as I would put Alexis Henderson books. Like The Year of the Witching, I'd say The Year of the Witching is a really good comparison actually for the types of themes that you're exploring in here. And then also just like House of Hunger, I would say all of these books fit that space where they are adult fiction. They have kind of younger protagonists. They're not YA, they're for adult readers, even though I think they would be good introductions for people who primarily read YA or new adults to read adult fiction, just because I feel like you can kind of identify with a younger main character while still dealing with a book that is plotted and designed and organized like an adult book. However, this book can get very sad at times and very intense. The large trigger warnings in here are violence against women, both in terms of domestic violence and sexual violence, and there is a sexual assault scene that is a major part of the story, and that is on page. So know that going into this one. This was quite intense. The ending was very much intense. I would say for this one, my biggest critique would have to be the pacing in this one. The pacing is very uneven. It's something that I didn't mind. It's something that didn't like ruin the reading experience for me, but I like a slower paced book. But this book just kind of at the beginning, especially if you can hang in there and keep going from there, it's just the pacing's a little bit uneven, so I feel like that might lose some people. So just know that going in, that it does deal with very dark topics. The pacing's a little uneven, especially at the beginning, but this is really well done historical horror. If again you enjoy that young woman being demonized, like being an outcast from her society because of different beliefs, if you like the anti-colonial themes, the struggle between indigenous religion and culture, and then colonial cultural and religion coming in and kind of the clash between those two aspects. If you like historical horror, I think this one is really going to work for a lot of people. Again, make sure you check those trigger warnings. I briefly mentioned them here, but the ending is very intense. So good job, Bruce. You picked a good book for the first portion of this vlog. Now we're going to move on to Obi and see what Obi picks. We are back with Obi's pick. Definitely a different vibe than Island Witch, but he went ahead and picked Among the Living by Tim Lebbon. I'm very interested to check this one out because while this was on my radar for the horror premise, I've since learned that the author has written a lot of novelizations for movies and then also some work that has been turned into movies. So very interested to see how that is going to impact the tone and the writing of this book and what kind of writer voice that we're going to experience, but this is about, I believe, several expeditions. There's one that's more science-based, like one that's more like take pictures, leave only footprints, and then another one that is really exploring into the Arctic, and they unleash a horrific contagion that has rested frozen and undisturbed for many millennia, and these two groups have to kind of work together to try and stop it in its tracks and try and stop it from spreading to the wider world beyond. So this is actually something that I talked about it in my, I think February, this released in February, my February anticipated releases, about how this is a concept that I'm quite worried about when it comes to our world and how the ice caps are melting and how where we might see some diseases that have been frozen in the ice be released. So like that whole concept is very terrifying to me. So I have a feeling this is gonna hit some nerves with that. Some terrifying expedition horror. Also just based on the way that I'm reading how they have to work together if they're to survive and stop the horror from spreading to the wider world. I'm wondering if it's not just going to be like a traditional disease, but maybe something a bit more supernatural as well. This author did write the book The Silence, which was a Netflix movie that I know got criticized for being like a knockoff of The Silent Place, or The Quiet Place, but the book actually predates The Quiet Place. So the book did not take any inspiration from The Quiet Place, but the movie was not that great. I have not read the book, but the movie was interesting. It's a Netflix original. So I'm quite interested to see if like the pandemic aspects that are going to be in this book do tend to lean a little bit more supernatural than just maybe a virus, but we'll have to see. It would be picked an interesting one, and I will check back in about the 50% mark to let y'all know how much I'm liking it. Good morning. I have made it 50% of the way through Among the Living, and I am enjoying it so far. I am very curious to see how the next 50% of this book is going to go, if I'm going to be quite honest. It is very fast-paced. There's a lot of action. Like, it's definitely a book that the chapters aren't very short, but it does keep the momentum moving. So I have already talked about the synopsis of this book a little bit, but now 50% of the way through. But we are following in this book two groups of explorers. One of the groups of explorers, they are going into these places and finding like rare mineral and like rare like materials in the earth to sell to the highest bidder. So what they do is technically legal, but kind of a little bit shady. They're exploiting the earth for raw materials, and with that comes kind of an exploitation of indigenous peoples that live in the areas where they go. The other group that we're following is spearheaded by some environmental activists who also a lot of the times skirt legality to stop these groups. The group looking to sell the materials is led by Dean. The group looking to save this environment and prevent the exploitation of materials is led by Beth Ann. They were childhood friends that they used to work for the same sort of goal in terms of environmental preservation, and they went their separate paths. So we have that. We have these two groups. Dean's group goes to what they think is a run-of-the-mill expedition. They go down underneath the earth to a place that has recently been rendered accessible to humans by like the permafrost and everything melting. So they go under the earth, they discover something horrific. Now both teams, even though they have very different objectives at the beginning, have to flee this terror before it catches up with them and catches up with humanity in general. My number one complaint with this so far is that we do get to see the horror, the terror in the caves. It's pretty cool. I do wish there was more at this point in time cave exploring. I think we spend about 2.5 chapters in the caves, around the caves, and even discussing what they find in the caves, and then the rest has been these two groups teaming up and traveling across a very desolate landscape to try and escape the terrors that they found in the cave. So I do wish they would have done some more time exploring, just because I think cave exploring and expeditions, I think there is such a level of inherent horror with that. I'm thinking of things like even The Descent, that horror movie. Like, it's such an interesting premise because when we go and explore these places, it's so easy for things to go just terribly awry. And I think there's a sort of like claustrophobia in that, in not being able to escape that situation very easily because you're underground. So I do wish we had gotten more time in that. This is looking more as if we're going to just spend the majority of this book with the crew traveling across this desolate landscape, which again, interesting. I just wish we had more of that cave scenario, because the beginning, very creepy, very eerie. We're following these groups as they're going deep down below the earth and finding something terrible. I definitely wanted a little bit more than that. And then at this point in the 50% mark, it's kind of unclear. It seems to be that they're running from the possibility of a contagion or a disease that they encountered in the caves. But the circumstance in which they encountered this potential disease or contagion, and the way in which they're also talking about other things that they've experienced when they've traveled the world and just seen some truly like unexplainable things, it also could be a little bit paranormal potentially. So it's kind of going back and forth between those. It also might be both, but those are my thoughts on it so far. I definitely think this is interesting. When I'm reading this, I could absolutely see how this author either writes a lot of like books that get adapted into movies, and this author has also written a lot of adaptations of like movies, like the novelizations, which one of those, which is super cool, this author has written The Cabin in the Woods, the official movie novelization. So I can definitely see how this author's work translates really, really well to the big screen, because this definitely feels like the pacing of a movie, definitely more plot focused than character focused, but with the setup of survival and what our characters kind of have to go through, I definitely prefer that kind of more fast-paced setting. So I'm going to keep reading this, hopefully finish it today. I'm definitely interested to see what direction this book takes, particularly in the latter 50% of this book, and then we'll go ahead and have Bruce pick another book for us. It feels very fitting that I finished up this book, which was about a group that goes to an Arctic island to explore on the first day of spring. So I finished this. I don't really have too much additionally to add to what I've already talked about this book. It's very fast paced, it's very plot driven over character driven, and it does have to deal with the cordyceps fungus, which you may or may not be familiar with cordyceps because of The Last of Us, like those type of zombies. So very similar disease, very different in execution, but very similar kind of pathogen contagion in here. I can definitely see how this author's work works really well in terms of movie adaptations, because this feels like one that can very easily be adapted into a movie. I think this is one where if you have a hard time visualizing things in books, I think this one, it definitely reads like a movie script or like a movie action, like the way that everything goes about. So you might enjoy this. Definitely more plot driven than character driven than I normally prefer, but this was very readable. It did not take me long at all to read this. I think the action in this book takes place technically within 2 days, so it's a lot. It's very fast paced. It keeps it moving. If you're looking for a fast plot driven read about some contagion, maybe a little bit, I wouldn't necessarily call this zombies by any means, but like zombie adjacent, that sort of eco and pathogen type horror, you might want to check this out. So I had a fun time reading it. I definitely say at this point in time I like Island Witch a little bit more than Among the Living, but definitely neither dog has picked like a 1-star read so far, which is good. So that's good. I've enjoyed both of my reading experiences, and let's go ahead and see what Bruce picks out for me to read next. Alright, so Bruce has picked a haunted house story. Kind of funny that both of his picks have been kind of paranormal speculative, but this is The House of Last Resort by Christopher Golden. Christopher Golden, this is the first author in this vlog that I have read something from before. He's kind of a mixed bag author for me. I enjoyed All Hallows more than Road of Bones, but this one, definitely the cover, first of all, very striking. I like the colors, and it also has to deal with like a haunted house scenario. I love haunted house horror. I love that trope, so I am interested in seeing what this is going to be about. Just briefly looking at the dust jacket on this one, it says this is set against the backdrop of an idyllic Sicilian town about an unspeakable horror that will chill you to your bones. So it looks like across Italy there are many half-empty towns nearly abandoned by those who migrated to the coast or to cities. The beautiful crumbling hilltop town of Messina, I'm not sure, is among them, but its mayor has taken drastic measures to rebuild, selling abandoned homes to anyone in the world for a single euro as long as the buyer promises to live there for at least 5 years. It's a no-brainer for this American company. Both work remotely, and it seems like just such a fun adventure, and who wouldn't want to live in the Italian countryside and get like a sprawling house for a euro? Honestly, me, this is how you get me into a haunted house. Okay, you give me some historic property, I would love to be a homeowner and just, you know, have this beautiful historical home to take care of. That is how I would become the protagonist in a horror novel or horror movie, absolutely. So this couple moves in, it seems like things start going haywire, and it turns out that the home that they moved into has some deadly secrets. I also saw very briefly there might be some catacombs at play here, which I love. I think I was talking about this, I definitely was actually, when I was talking about Obi's pick, Among the Living, how underground horror is so creepy and so effective for me. In particular in Catacombs, As Above So Below is a really good found footage horror movie that goes into the Paris catacombs. So if there's catacombs in here, that's pretty exciting. So haunted house set in Italy, house with a very strange and dark past. I think Bruce has set me up for a really good pick here, so I'm really excited to see what I think of it. I'll get to read it, and you know the drill. I'll check back in at about the 50% mark and let you know how Bruce's pick is doing. morning vlog. I am up way too early for work. It's a lot earlier than I normally get up, so I'm tired. There's a morning voice going on, but I did get 50% of the way through The House of Last Resort, and I'm really enjoying it. I know I mentioned earlier that Christopher Golden is super hit or miss for me just based on what I've read from him in the past, but if you like, you know, paranormal haunted house horror, this is very entertaining. You know, it takes place in a gorgeous old house in the Italian countryside. Well, so far, I'm going to be very honest, at the 50% mark, it's not really reinventing the wheel in any significant way, but honestly, that's okay. That's okay for me. You know, sometimes I feel the same way for like movies as well. Like sometimes you don't want to sit down and watch like art house, something super like experimental and different, and sometimes you just want like some good old bread and butter, like, you know, you're going into watching a haunted house movie, reading a haunted house book. So while like the pacing is definitely what you could expect from two people who move into a house that they don't realize has a very dark past, I am really enjoying just again the Italian-ness of it all. I am going to be that annoying study abroad student for a second. In college I did take a summer semester. My college offered classes in Florence, so I lived in Florence, Italy for a semester, so I'm enjoying being in like an Italian setting, and obviously if someone offered me this deal I would absolutely take it. So I understand why they moved into this haunted house, and I also really like how the couple, they're very much on the same team. They're both kind of experiencing little things, but they're very open in talking about it, and it's not like neither of them is really gaslighty of the other's experience, which is also very great. So yeah, that's my short and sweet 50% mark update. This is split into two sections, September above and October below. So I just am ready to start the second part of this book. So it splits pretty evenly into two parts for me. And so for this vlog, that was very convenient, but I'm ready to get into October below. I feel like stuff's gonna hit the fan pretty soon. So looking forward to that. I'll check back in when I'm done with this. Okay, so I finished The House of Last Resort by Christopher Golden, 3 for 3. There's been no books in this vlog so far that I've like absolutely hated, so that's really good. My dogs are having great taste so far, which is exciting. So I don't have a lot to say about this one that I haven't already mentioned. If you like haunted house horror, especially if you like haunted house horror having to deal with, you know, demonic possessions and the church and exorcisms and all of that, I think you'll like this one. I don't think it necessarily brings anything like groundbreaking to the table, but I don't think that's an insult. Like sometimes you just want to sit down and read a really good haunted house story, and I enjoyed this one. I know that it might sound very harsh that I've kept saying like it doesn't bring anything new to the genre. However, like this genre is like my favorite subgenre of horror. I think I have read the most haunted house horror. I've definitely watched the most like paranormal and haunted house horror. That's the type of horror I I love. So I just have so many things to compare this to, and this didn't do anything bad. I really enjoyed it, and it is, I think, 290 pages, so it is a fairly fast-paced ride. It's split up into two parts, September above and October below, as above so below, and we do get some catacombs action in here. So I know the last book I kind of wanted some more like underground horror. This definitely gives those catacombs. I do also really love the setting, so the setting is something that I feel like could put this apart from other haunted house possession books, because it does take place in the idyllic Sicilian countryside, and I really enjoyed those aspects. Those aspects were really fun. I felt like the premise of why this couple is at this house and why this couple doesn't leave, I thought that was really well explained. Like I've mentioned previously in this vlog, you know, it was enjoyable to see, you know, this couple moves into this house and you can totally tell why they would want to stay in this house even when things start to go awry, because you get a beautiful house for €1, you get to move to Europe. There are a lot of factors that are very compelling for this couple to stay, as well as for the most part this couple are on the same team, which is excellent. I feel like that can be a trope that's found really frequently in like the haunted house genre, where especially, you know, family moves into an old house with a bad history, and the husband is like, it's mostly the husband, but let's be honest, is like telling his wife and kids and whoever else lives in the house that like, no, it's just, you know, an old house, or just really gaslighting the situation. Both Tommy and Kate are on the same page, so that's really refreshing to see. So as you can see, like there's a lot of good about this. The reason why I just had mentioned it doesn't reinvent the wheel is because it doesn't, but that wheel is excellent. You know, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. This is not going to have like some shocking twist ending where you're like, where did this even come from? I thought we were reading a book about this and it turns out to be a book about this. I feel like if you know the plot points of a possession horror, you're going to know the plot points in here, but it was a lot of fun. I think my biggest criticism would have to be I wanted more Italian. I wanted more Italian culture put in here, and I think just because I have Island Witch so recently to compare this to, that one had so much Sri Lankan spoken. There was different languages, not just English in there, and when the characters didn't speak English, there would often be, you know, that language in there and then an English translation. But especially because I was reading the audiobook, that was so immersive, and because I have, you know, I've taken a little bit of Italian, and even if I hadn't, I felt like this was missing that. There are definitely like portions where you get some Italian that's spoken, but for, you know, a town that primarily Italian is the first language, some residents speak English, some do not. There was a lot of dialogue that was in Italian, but it wasn't in Italian, if that makes sense. Like, for example, Tommy's grandmother, who has lived in this town her whole life, she'll say, like, trying to think of something that doesn't spoil anything, but she'll, you know, say something like, dinner's ready, she said in Italian, and there's no mention of the Italian. So I would have liked a little bit more of just like that Italian language and culture like diffused into this book. That would have been really neat to see, because I liked what I saw. I just wanted more of it. And then also, I think if you don't like rats, just skip this one. I know rats are like a big thing for a lot of people, so if you have any sort of like triggers surrounding rats, skip it. Skip this one. I think that's the biggest trigger in here. Other than that, if you've seen a possession movie, you kind of know like going into it what you're expecting, so like standard trigger warnings for those I'd say apply there. But overall, I had a fun time. This is definitely my favorite Christopher Golden book by a long shot. This one was a whole lot better than All Hallows, and I enjoyed All Hallows more than Road of Bones, so definitely this one really shines as one that I greatly prefer over his last two releases. So if you're in the mood for a haunted house horror, I enjoyed it, and now I am just so excited to see what Obi picks for the fourth and final book in this vlog. So Obi picked out the fourth and final book of this vlog, and that is going to be Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. It's actually kind of funny the way this worked out was that the first two books of this vlog that my dogs picked were authors that were new to me. And then the second two books that my dogs picked out are authors that I've read before, and not only that I've read before, but I've had like a very mixed bag in terms of my reading history with the author. So for this author, I have read Last House on Needless Street and Sundial by this author before, and I liked Sundial. I didn't care for Last House on Needless Street, so I'm curious to see where Looking Glass Sound takes me. Catriona Ward has very interesting concepts, and they're always like, I almost want to call her like an M. Night Shyamalan of the horror, like the writing horror genre, because no matter if I do not like or if I like something that she does, you cannot deny that it is just, you know, she's swinging for home runs every single time, at least from what I've read. And I know, so she has this one, and I think there's another one that's on my radar, Little Eve. And I've heard reviews of all four of these books, you know, just talking about the twists and bizarrety of like the scenarios. So, you know, going into a Catriona Ward, she's never gonna play it safe. She's going to go for things that are kind of out of the box, and I appreciate that. At the end of the day, again, I feel like M. Night Shyamalan is a really good example, because there are some movies of his that I really like. There are some movies of his that I don't care for, but the ones that I don't like, risks were taken, and that's fascinating, and I respect that out of a creator, because I definitely think, you know, there are safe routes to go and there are not so safe routes, and sometimes divisive books can be really fascinating. I'm thinking in particular of Last House on Needless Street, because I want to say that's this author's most well-known work. I feel like those are all either 1-star or 5-star reviews, so I'm very fascinated to see kind of what I think about this book. I know that it's going to be a wild ride. The back of this book, because I do want to go into this a little bit not knowing what's going on, just because of the twists and turns, right? But the back of this book says, "Writers are monsters. We eat everything we see." We're following a writer. That's all I want to know. It's another masterful story from Catriona Ward about friendship, betrayal, dark obsessions, and the impossibility of escaping your own story. So I'm going to assume that is going to be a little bit of an unreliable narrator. It usually is. And our main character is an author, which is super interesting. So it is a very laid back Sunday while I'm filming this. So I do anticipate getting through quite a good chunk of this. I don't know if we'll exactly get to the 50% mark. We'll see, but you know the drill by now. I am going to read until the 50% mark and come back on here and let you know how Obi's doing with his second pick of the vlog, and hopefully I like it. Very blurry, low quality update on the phone because it is very late. That's kind of a trend with this vlog, I've noticed. But I can't sleep, and I started to read Looking Glass Sound. I was about 20 pages into it before I picked it up tonight, and it is now about like 2:30, and I'm zipping through it. I'm 50% of the way through it. I really go into this one knowing as little as possible, and I don't have that much else to kind of give for this update because, again, you know, as little as possible. This is a very wild ride, but I'm 50% of the way through this. I don't think I'll get it all finished tonight because it is getting very late, but this is such a wild ride, and I'm very curious to see where the story goes from here. Okay friends, I did it. I finished Looking Glass Sound by Catriona and I loved it. This is my favorite book that I read for this vlog. It's also my favorite book that I've read from this author so far, and I'm just really excited to be ending this vlog with an absolute 5-star read. I was so invested this whole entire time, and if you pick this up, definitely do not read The Dust Jacket. You will have such a different reading experience. I'm glad that I didn't read it until I was about like 60% of the way through, and then I went back and kind of read some of The Dust Jacket, and if I would have read it at the beginning of this book, I would have had just such a different reading experience. So go into this knowing that this is about authorship. This is about writing stories, creating stories, how those stories can take on a life of their own, whether that be literally or metaphorically or both, who knows, but about authorship and about how things and events from your past can come to haunt you. Yeah, go into it, have a good time. It's just, there was one aspect where I just was so shocked, in a good way, pleasantly surprised. Just the way that this all ties together at the end is so good. And I am definitely glad that I picked this up, and you know, I had OB pick this book up for me, I should say, and I gave Catriona another chance because now she's an auto pick up author. I'm going to go back and read Little Eve, which is the only thing of hers I have yet to read, and then I'll be picking up her books whenever she comes out with them. I'm also just now noticing as I'm filming this, I am very much, my hair and my shirt is fitting the cover. So I don't know, you are what you read, I suppose. But while I did love this so much, it does present a little bit of a problem for this vlog because this was my favorite book. This was my favorite book, hands down, of everything that I've read in this vlog, followed by Island Witch by Jayatissa, and then The House of Last Resort by Christopher Golden, and then coming in last place is the Among the Living book by Tim Lebbon. So if we stack them favorite to least favorite, this was an OB pick, this was a Bruce pick, this was a Bruce pick, this was an OB pick, and if I run my star ratings of all of them, they come out to be the same. So my dogs, they both have great taste. Now, I don't think there's too much analysis to be had because, you know, I just put treats on the books and the dogs ran, and whichever, you know, treat on the book they grabbed first, they picked as their pick. But Bruce did tend to pick books that have themes that I tend to really enjoy. They're books like possession and ghostly horror and religious horror, things that I tend to gravitate towards very well. And you can see they're concepts that work really well for me in fiction because these were my second and third places. Obi was a bit more experimental with the picks. He picked a book from an author that I've had a mixed relationship from in the past, and then a kind of sci-fi thriller one as well. So, you know, Obi picked some experimental things, Bruce picked some tried and true in terms of subgenres of horror, but I had a really good time reading all of these books, and I had a really good time having my dogs pick my TBR. But that's gonna be it for this video. I had a lot of fun. I hope y'all did too. Definitely give this video a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. Number one, letting me know if I should do this video again, and then number two, which one of my dogs do you think had the better reading taste? Which one of my dogs picked out books that you were more interested in? And that's gonna be it for this video. Subscribe for all of the bookish horror cozy gaming content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye!